Hey everyone! So today we're diving into something I see all the time, common mistakes when drawing anime eyes from the side view. I've prepared 6 heads in different styles for this demonstration. What you see in red and green is the Loomis head structure. Quick refresher. Notice how the side circles of these heads have different diameters. The wider the head, the smaller that side circle becomes. I've covered the Loomis method, including its head structure, and how to adjust it for anime heads in detail in previous videos. I'll link those below if you want the full breakdown. But here's the thing. That side circle is super important for eye placement, and I'm going to show you exactly why it plays such an important role before we get to the common mistakes. The side circle defines the head's side plane, showing us where the face or the front of the head approximately transitions into the side. To make this easier, you can draw somewhat of an S-curve from the top of the side circle down towards the chin, like you see in red here. This line also gives us a good idea of the outer edge of the eye sockets, helping us figure out how much room we have to work with when placing the eyes. Alright, with that, let's jump into the 7 deadly mistakes I often see beginners make with eyes from the side view. Mistake number 1. Eyes are placed too high or too low. First, let's look at the head with realistic proportions. I would say placing the eyes too high is a lot more common than placing them too low. Even with the Loomis method, many people mistake the construction line for the eyebrows for the position of the eyes and draw them too high. Loomis construction lines are general guidelines for a well-proportioned head. In reality, proportions vary, so placing the eyes higher is generally okay. The key is to keep the overall placements balanced, which many people struggle with initially. They often place the eyes way too high, resulting in a disproportionate face and a forehead that's too short. Therefore, eye placement is the first thing you need to be careful about. Remember that with realistic proportions, the eyes are located in mid-height of the head. Here the eyes are slightly lower than the mid-height, which is not uncommon when drawing anime females. While you could make this work with a few adjustments, I hope you can see it's a bit off when compared to the left version. With Chibis, or whenever you're aiming for a kawaii look, you'll want to place the eyes in the lower half of the head. This makes the character appear younger and significantly enhances their cuteness. You also want to place the bottom of the eyes around the same level as the nose's tip, or even lower. From the side view, you can see the nose is tiny and upturned with a short bridge. For the version on the right, you'd have to draw the nose higher. Otherwise, the eyes would end up on the lower forehead. The same goes for a profile like this. Pay attention to the shape of the nose and where the nose ends and the forehead begins. This should give you a clue as to where to place the eye for a more proportionate look. If you place the eyes too high, the head will automatically appear elongated, potentially ruining the balance of its height to width ratio. You would also have to move the ears up and change the nose. It affects everything. Same here. When drawing faces with more childlike proportions and big eyes, you want to lower the eyes in general. Mistake number 2 is drawing the eye too close to the nose bridge. This is a very common mistake for those new to the manga or anime style. Now here's the thing. Realistically, eyes are actually quite close to the nose bridge from the side view. The distance largely depends on your nose bridge's height. A lower bridge means a closer eye placement. However, in anime, you often place them more inward. If we consider the outer edge of the eye socket or the side plane of the head, we get a good idea of the safe space for eye placement. Factor in the side plane of the nose and the cheekbones, and you can figure out what makes a realistic choice. However, many beginners place the eyes too close to the bridge, and this combined with the wrong eye shape can really make the face look off. While some artists do draw eyes very close to the nose bridge, and that's fine if it looks balanced, most of the time, the eye is placed a little farther away, closer to the edge of the side plane of the head. This would be too close for this nose. This would be okay. This is a good distance. This would be a bit too much. Alright, let's take a look at the next female head. This is too close to the nose. This position would be fine. But this is probably more common. And this would be too much. The mistakes can be all kinds of combinations. Too close to the nose and then too high at the same time. This position would be fine. This might be okay, but this would be a better distance in my opinion. This could still work, but this would be too much. You also don't want the eye to be too close to the ears from the side view. Again, too close. This is a good distance. You can even go this far. This is too high and too close. If I move the eye around, I hope you can see which position looks acceptable and which not. Try to disregard the eyebrow for a moment, since you'd need to change its position as well when moving the eye. With stylized characters, a lot of it has to do with preference as well. But if you don't have a trained eye yet, it's easy to misjudge. So try to be mindful of the key points in this video. Once again, this is way too close to the nose. This is closer to the nose than the example to the left, but still okay. I think with an eye and profile like this, you could push it even closer to the ear like this. But placing it closer to the nose, no matter if positioned low or high, doesn't look right. Now let's move on to mistake number 3. Eye shape identical to front view. This is a very common mistake as well when someone is still learning about shapes and forms and how to visualize and draw them in perspective. The eye then lacks a side view perspective, and instead, the shape resembles that of the front view. And again, oftentimes the placement is off as well. Usually the eyes are drawn too close to the nose. Depending on your skills, it might not look too bad, but drawing the eyes like this from the side view will make the head appear more flat. Another thing you want to be mindful of is to keep the tips of the eyelashes or each end of the upper and lower eyelid pointy. Instead of using one continuous line, use 2 tapered lines. Another common mistake is to draw the iris with a similar width, as seen from the front view, and then just shift the pupil to one side to make the eye appear as if it's looking straight ahead. You need to change both the shape and width of the iris, as well as the pupil. If you're uncertain how to change the shape of the eye, try this. From the side view, eyes are about half the width of how they appear from the front. Take note of the shape of the outer half, and use this as your first clue. As your second clue, look at the overall shape of the eyelids from the front view and imagine squeezing them to half their width. You can use a combination of these 2 clues as your base for the side perspective. This means you want to flatten the curves of the upper eyelid slightly when transforming it to the side view. Let's say you have an eye like this. For the side view, take the right half of the eye and flatten the curves of the eyelids a bit. You can continue the curve slightly at the top, hinting that the upper eyelid extends behind the eyeball. You can also add eyelashes at the top, allowing the curve of the upper eyelid to subtly fade or end there. Alright, let's move on to the other heads. Here we see another version of the same mistake, and as before, I've seen eyes like this positioned in various ways. Going back to what we just discussed, Pay attention to the shape of the outward half of the eye. Also, observe the height where the upper eyelid ends, or where the outer corner of the eye sits. Use this information as your base for the side view eye shape. Although it can depend on the eye shape and tilt, keep in mind that with most eyes from the side view, the highest point of the eyelid is right in front, and not like in this example, here. On to the next example. When dealing with huge eyes like this, you need to be especially careful with them because they are so prominent. The eyes can quickly turn into something creepy. Most of us have likely seen this type of drawing before. It's common because we're working with more realistic proportions and shapes, and many children and budding artists, regardless of their style, start their journey by drawing eyes from the profile like this. Once again, use the shape of the front view to figure out the shape of the side view. When drawing the iris, keep in mind that the upper eyelid protrudes slightly more than the lower eyelid. The same goes for this example. Eyes like this always remind me of ancient Egyptian drawings. Let's move on to common mistake number 4. The shape of the pupil and eyes with too much width. In this example, not only is the eye shape wrong, but also way too wide. If you want to go the more realistic route, the eye should not have the same width from the side view as from the front view, or even more. Granted, there are artists who do this, but once again, it's a matter of preference, and if your foundational skills are still at the beginning stages, be careful with your choices. Another common mistake is the shape of the iris and pupil, as well as their placement. Avoid just cutting the shape of the iris and pupil from the front view in half. You also want to leave a small gap between the pupil and the front edge of the eyeball, if possible. The pupil is basically a hole in the iris. A lot of people teach that the iris is not a flat surface, but concave. If you consider the iris to be concave, the pupil would be placed slightly off-center from an angle. However, from my understanding, the surface of the iris can actually be flat, concave, or even convex. This depends on many factors, like eye health, specific lighting conditions, or the state of accommodation, meaning its curvature can subtly change as the eyes focus on distant or nearby objects. While some sources suggest the iris is generally flat with a slight curvature, others say it's generally slightly concave. Ultimately, all three options seem to be anatomically plausible, and for drawing purposes, I think it's fine to treat it as flat, concave, or convex. However, from my observation, treating it as a flat or concave surface is more commonly seen in drawings. Either way, the pupil would never look like this from the side view. If you're treating it as a convex surface, draw the pupil in a way that subtly hints at its whole shape, instead of just drawing half an ellipse glued to the contour of the eyeball. But if there is enough space, leave at least a tiny gap between the pupil and the contour of the eyeball or iris. All right, let's take a look at a few more examples. So here's another one with the same mistakes. From the information I provided earlier, I hope you'll be able to identify the mistakes and correct them, even without reference. Again, all the key points I mentioned before apply here. One thing I want to mention with this one is the tiny highlight in the iris. If you look at the eye from the front view, the highlight is to our left. I kept the highlight on the same side for both the side view examples. In the example to the right, I had to move the highlight lower because of the size of the pupil. In both of these examples, there might be times when keeping the highlight on the outer edge of the eye just doesn't look good. In such cases, you can move the highlight to the opposite side. On to the next example. Once again, when in doubt about the eye shape from this perspective, imagine the eye from the front view and focus on the half with the eye's outer corner and make it slightly flatter. Let's look at a more realistically shaped eye. From the side view, you don't want to copy the exact curve of the front view. You don't want to use complete straight lines either. Do something in between. You want a subtle curve to indicate the roundness of the eyeball underneath the eyelid. So in this example, you could even go a little flatter as well. Not only is this curve too extreme, but because of this and the exaggerated width, too much of the white eyeball is visible. For the white part to be this visible, it would imply the eye isn't just located on the front of the face, but also curves significantly onto the side of the head. As you can see, if the eye were curved onto the side plane of the head like this, the white part would be much more visible from the side view than from the front view. Since the eyeball is naturally round, it's fine to see more of the white from the side view, but this example is far too extreme. In stylized drawing, not everything has to be perfectly realistic, but there's always a fine balance you'll need to develop an eye for. In addition to all the other points, you also want to make sure you can smoothly connect the endpoints of the upper and lower eyelid, even if you don't draw that connection in. You always need to consider the overall shape, not just the visible parts. This is another very common mistake, so be careful with that as well. I feel this is a very familiar sight as well, as many budding artists draw eyes from the side like this. As mentioned before, you do see some manga artists draw eyes with exaggerated width from the side view. So I think if the iris and pupil were drawn correctly, and the curve of the upper eyelid were flatter, you could potentially make this work, but only if the eyes also had more width from the front view. I would also move the eye slightly more to the right. However, considering the eye width from the front view, half the width you see here from the side would suffice. Another point I want to mention here is the eyelashes. Don't draw them shooting straight up into the sky from the upper eyelashes like this. Eyelashes act as a barrier against dust and dirt, so they generally grow outward from the eyelid. You can draw them like this, or even curved upward, but you want to add curves and not draw them as straight lines. With that, let's take a look at mistake number 5, which is the wrong eye shape. The eye in itself is fine. What went wrong here is that the side view shape differs from the front view. A lot of the time, people forget to pay attention to where the outer corner of the eye is, resulting in a different eye shape compared to the front view. Here, we have another example of a misshapen upper eyelid. It's all about understanding 3D forms mixed with 2D shape elements. This is a skill that develops over time as you learn more about shapes and forms. When you're still at the beginning of your art journey, lines can turn out a bit stiff and angular, so try to recognize and work with subtle curves. Understanding 3D forms is crucial for improving your art. However, also paying close attention to your lines and details, such as using tapered lines to create pointed effects, can significantly elevate your work. Developing an understanding for 3D forms takes time, but practicing your lines is something you can do with every stroke you draw. And it all starts with the awareness of what to pay attention to. And I think one of the reasons people struggle with anime eyes is because sometimes they can appear rather 2D and flat, while other times depth is added to them. It's probably hard to wrap your mind around when to make realistic choices, and when stylistic choices are okay. The eye to our right appears two-dimensional and flat. To add a bit more realism to its shape, think of the shape of the head. Here we have the side plane, extending down alongside the eye, towards the cheekbone and chin. While there are exceptions depending on the drawing style, generally, when drawing eyes from the side view, you'll want some resemblance of a triangular shape for the eye. Speaking of triangles, even huge eyes like this from the side are basically a triangle shape stretched in height. And depending on where the outer corner of the eye is, you need to adjust its angles. This next one probably seems like an unlikely mistake, and my example might not be the very best representation of it. But I do often see people drawing eyes that don't match the face. Usually, it's a combination of a head with adult features and proportions, and then big eyes similar to these. This is supposed to be an exaggerated example of this. This in itself doesn't look too bad, but when drawing the iris, don't tilt it like this. Instead, tilt it this way. And the point here is, the eye shape is different from the front view. If you're drawing a random character's profile, it's fine, but if you're drawing a specific character, consistency is important. Another thing is, sometimes you might see characters with unusual eye shapes like this, with slightly exaggerated forms and curves. I often see younger people try to imitate something like this without truly understanding where these stylized shapes and forms derive from, ending up drawing something like this. Even though simplified or stylized, these shapes and forms always have an origin in realism, which needs to be studied if you want to truly understand and make them work and look good. So, be careful and pay close attention to the subtle details and nuances when copying something. With that, let's get to mistake number 6. Upper eyelid is too thick. If you're still developing your motor and observation skills, it's easy to misjudge, memorize, and execute things incorrectly. It's a natural process. So once again, when looking at artwork, take notice of the fine details and revisit them once in a while. You might be surprised by things you haven't noticed before, and you might realize information you've saved in your head seemed accurate at the time, but now appears inaccurate after you've developed your skills. When it comes to the tip of the upper eyelid here, there are different ways you can draw the edge. For eyes like this, it might be best to imagine the shape of a realistic eye. This is basically the upper eyelid, which is drawn a little thicker to represent the eyelash line. Just as people use eyeliners in real life to emphasize and enhance their eyes by adding definition and depth, you often thicken the upper eyelid in manga or anime. Since eyelashes are often only added selectively, which contributes to the upper eyelid appearing darker, you'll want to substitute that with thicker lines. Some styles call for really thick contours, while others not so much, so be careful about that as well. You can either add one or a couple of eyelashes at the tip, or leave them out. This example would be fine on its own, but it's inconsistent when compared to the front view. This leaves us with mistake number 7, the last one for this video. Eyes with exaggerated protrusion. While realistically, eyes aren't flat and do naturally protrude a bit, depicting this subtly is key, especially when it comes to big eyes. This is one of those times when you shouldn't think of the shape too realistically, because an extreme bulge can easily create a creepy look. When drawing big eyes like this, you usually keep the iris relatively flat, but it's also not uncommon to draw them somewhat concave. And as we discussed earlier, be careful with the placement of the pupil. With more realistic-looking eyes, you can definitely add a bit more of a protrusion, but in this case, the problem again lies in the placement of the pupil. This is another very common mistake, as mentioned earlier. When drawing the eye from the side view, you could think of it as drawing the shape of the iris without the cornea. And perspective-wise, think of it as drawing the iris slightly turned towards the viewer. This means you'll see it as an ellipse with the front plane and the pupil still visible, instead of a 100% side view. If you want to turn the iris more into a side view, you can make it really thin widthwise, as you see in the example to the left. However, if you want to emphasize the iris a bit more, you can draw it like in this example to the left. As for the version to the right, the protrusion in itself is fine, but combined with the positioning of the pupil, it's something you'll want to avoid. And once again, the eye has too much width in comparison to the front view. Also, be careful with the shape. Alright, that's it for the 7 most common mistakes that I have observed many times. One more thing. If you just want to draw a profile view of a random character and aren't sure about the head width from the front view, and therefore don't have any idea how big the side circle is supposed to be, you can take these examples as a general reference. These are very common proportions, and the width of the head generally changes with the size of the eyes. You don't need to be super exact. Just pick the one that comes closest to your intended proportions. Then, experiment with that side circle diameter and adjust it as you see fit. That's it for this video. I hope this was helpful. Have you been making some of these mistakes yourself in the past or present? Let me know in the comments. And as always, if you liked this video, please leave a comment and hit the like button and subscribe. It's free and would help my channel. Thank you for watching.